Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another box set battle. Hasn't been one for a while, but today it's an Arrow special. It's Arrow video on Arrow video crime. Pardon the pun. So the first one is The Years of Lead, 5 crime films from 1973 to 1977, with the Powerhouse Indicator belly band, which is quite interesting. It's the influence of Indicator. And Vengeance Trails, 4 classic westerns. You know, apart from one of them, I hadn't really been familiar with them. So I'm just going to compare and contrast. These are 2 genres that I have a lot of time for. Obviously, they're one of the main themes is about masculinity and why men are so terrible. So we'll start with The Years of Lead. This is 5 films. Sadly it is 5 films on 3 discs. Again, the usual lovely cardboard box. And it has a shiny booklet. Look how shiny that booklet is. That's top class shine. Now the Years of Lead films you need to kind of put into context. The Years of Lead, that phrase isn't just invented by Arrow. It was a phrase to describe the late 60s, really to the late 80s in Italy. Very much like everywhere else around the world. The late 60s and 70s were a time of political turmoil, and especially in Italy you had bombings and terrorist activity both on the far left and the far right. You had assassinations, you had strikes, you had student protests, you had police officers being assassinated, judges blown up, you had union leaders and student activists dying in police custody. You had problems with the economy, you had a rise in crime, you had a rise in the drug trade, and the cinema of the time, the police film, the crime film, reflected that. Films based in Naples and Rome, Turin. So it was not a pleasant time to live through in Italy. So these films pretty much came from that and reflected the time. But the good thing about this set is all 5 of the films are slightly different. There's a couple that are fairly similar, but they are kind of a different flavour. So again, like I said, it's 5 films over 3 discs, so there's just 3 cases. So we have Colt 38 Special Squad, which is directed by Massimo Dallamano. You do have reversible artwork, which gives you the artwork for the other film. This is Highway Racer, starring Maurizio Merli without his moustache, because he was famous for the crime films. And this was directed by Stelvio Massi, who would make 6 films with Merli over a 3-year period. The extras are pretty much talking with cast and crew. There's a film historian, there's a couple of film historians that talk about the period and talk about what was going on. And then we have Savage 3, which is directed by Vittorio Salerno. and we have Like Rabid Dogs, not to be confused by Rabid Dogs by Mario Bava. This is directed by Mario Imperoli. And then finally we have No, This Case is Happily Resolved, which is a brilliant title. Again, this is directed by Vittorio Salerno, who I think only made like 4 films. And again, this one just has a general cover of all the films put together. So this one has a disc on its own, and this also stars Enrico Maria Salerno, who we'll talk about a bit more in both box sets. So let's start with Colt 38 Special Squad. This is essentially a riff on Magnum Force, which came out a couple of years later, and as we know, the Italian film industry would sometimes copy popular genres and then make 200 of them. But this is an interesting story about an inspector who's after a fairly merciless outfit whose wife is killed. This pushes him too far to finally demand that he gets a squad together with 38 revolvers and motorbikes to try and get some kind of equal footing. And like Magnum Force, some of the members of his team are a little bit too exuberant with their motorbike and gun violence. Not to the point where he has to like go after them the way Clint Eastwood does. Again, these films are violent, they're fairly brutal, there's not much time for emotion. You know, characters will die and another character will look sad for a couple of minutes and then it's just moving on. So there's not much time for emotional depth or anything in these films. But Colt 38 Special Squad is a lovely little film. And then we have Highway Racer, which is unusual in the sense of what the other police films were about. This is essentially about a police officer played by Merle, who's just an undercover. He's not a commissioner or anything, or a detective, and he pretty much just joined the force so he could drive, and he wants to drive fast and be the fastest driver on the force. And he has, his boss used to be famous and used to be the fastest driver on the force. That character was actually based on a real life police officer who was famous in the 50s and 60s for driving really well and chasing criminals and catching them using his driving skills. So it's kind of based on a real character. This is a fascinating film, and again there's this famous bank robber who's also a driver who gets his own nickname, and there's very much a kind of Robert De Niro, Al Pacino and Heat relationship, not only with the boss who's now off the streets, who originally has caught this guy a few times, but then his protege, you know, he infiltrates the gang by using driving skills, and he kind of has this respectful relationship with this criminal as well. There's a wonderful scene where the gang is kind of celebrating after one of their successful bank robberies, and some of the gang are calling the older police officer bad names, and the leader is like, no, you don't call him that, because he is a proper man, he is like a gentleman, you know, he is a worthy adversary, so we don't like badmouth him. So there's that kind of relationship going on. It's almost a kind of cross between Karate Kid with cars and Heat, in the sense of there's a protege, there's not quite a montage, but there is a section of him getting better with his car and his driving skills. There are lots of car chases in it, so it's probably my least favourite out of the set, but it's still a lot of fun. And then we have Savage 3 and Like Rabid Dogs, which are the two that are probably the most similar. Savage 3 is about three friends who work in respectable jobs. The leader of the three works in a lab with a computer, but also there's lab rats. There are some cuts in this film just because there's a scene where, or there was a scene where rats kill each other, so it's just a black screen, but it's like a couple of seconds at a time. It's no great big deal unless you love your animal cruelty. So it's part kind of social experiment, and then the three of them essentially go out and do crimes just for the thrill, just for the kick of it. He's the one that is the most psychopathic, and the other two kind of go along for the ride, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates. And again, Salerno is the cop trying to catch them. So it's more, again, it's this idea of the years of lead, that period where dissatisfied youth and the three of them are just taking it to extreme measures because they're tired of their living conditions, they're tired of their working conditions. Obviously, it's not an excuse to go out and murder people. Again, a lot of it is pretty brutal. Savage 3, and to a lesser extent, Like Rabid Dogs, are kind of brutal and nihilistic and cold films. Again, you know, art does reflect the times, and these films certainly do reflect what was going on in Italy at the time. I should say the prints on both these sets are excellent. And then we get to probably my favourite one of the set is No, the Case is Happily Resolved, which is about somebody who witnesses, again, a pretty savage beating and killing of a woman by a man out in the reeds out in the country. Again, you know, the role of women in these films is pretty much to be terrorised either physically or sexually. There's not a lot of great roles for women in these films. It's very much male cinema about men and about the evil within men. So the witness, decides not to go to the police and just keep quiet about it, but then he is accused, or the perpetrator then puts out a story that he was the witness. The perpetrator is a professor who knows people in government. So again, it's a wonderful satire of the corruption of power, but it also works as a really good thriller, as you get this battle of wits between this hapless guy who's desperately trying to prove he's innocent, and this professor who's obviously has high stature in society, who could never do such a thing as that. And again, Salerno is a veteran news reporter who smells something rotten in the situation and wants to find out the truth. It's an absolutely fantastic little film, and for me it's my favourite out of the five, but they all are really good. As usual in 60s and 70s Italian cinema, the scores of these films are absolutely magnificent. For me, you know, 60s and 70s Italian cinema arguably has the greatest musical scores in film history, and that's not just down to Ennio Morricone, obviously, Bruno Nicolai, who essentially was almost, the top of that tree, and then, he taught Morricone and lots of other people. So the music in these films is wonderful. Again, they are brutal, they are violent films. That's an 18 for a reason. Sometimes films get an 18 and it's like, why is that an 18 certificate? These films are definitely 18 films. So even if you're not a huge fan of the films, the scores are absolutely wonderful. But I would say all of these films are well worth checking out. And then we get to Vengeance Trails, which is 4 westerns. There's a Lucio Fulci western in this. So Fulci obviously started in comedy, and he did westerns, he did crime films before he did what he was famous for, which is his horror work. But there's a western of his in here. This is Maurizio Lucidi, Massimo Dallamano, who obviously did one in the Years of Lead box set, Antonio Margheriti, who again is perhaps more famous for his gialli. So again, with these box sets, you do get a poster of Massacre Time and Bandidos. And again, it's a shiny book rather than the matte book that you sometimes get. And as usual, it has essays and pictures. So they're going the shiny book route. So we have Massacre Time. So this is 4 films and they each get a separate thin case. So this is Massacre Time by Lucio Fulci, starring Franco Nero and George Hilton. This one has an absolutely wonderful interview with Franco Nero and George Hilton, and commentaries, and Fabio Mellini, the film historian, also appears on the Years of Lead box set. Then we have My Name is Picos, starring Robert Woods, and this is directed by Maurizio Lucidi. Again, commentaries, an interview with George Eastman, which is wonderful, an interview with actress Lucia Mogdungo, and a new documentary with Fabio Mellini talking about, along with the cinematographer Franco Villa. And then we have And God Said Cain with Klaus Kinski. Klaus Kinski as the hero. Think about that. Directed by Antonio Margheriti. This has a commentary, again another piece by Fabio Mellini, and an interview with actress Marcella Michelangeli, and another interview with Antonio Cantafora as an actor in the film. And then we have Bandidos, with Enrico Maria Salerno, directed by Massimo Dallamano. Apologies for the Italian pronunciations. This one has a commentary as well, and video interviews with assistant director and actor Gino Barbacani, as well as a piece with Fabio Mellini. So again, the extras in this set are absolutely wonderful. I'm a big spaghetti western fan. If they release more box sets, I'll buy them because I do have a soft spot for spaghetti westerns. So let's talk about Massacre Time first, directed by Lucio Fulci. This one's absolutely wonderful, and it has some Fulci moments in it. I should say they all have reversible artwork as well, as you kind of would expect. This stars Franco Nero as a prospector who's called back to his family ranch in town, where he discovers his brother, played by George Hilton, has become a drunk and he's lost the ranch because of this guy who's pretty much owns the town. The box set is called Vengeance Trails, so all the characters in these films are looking for vengeance. I'm not going to get into plot specifics of the films, but this one's absolutely fantastic. The head, the head baddie. We learn secrets about him that relate to Franco Nero. His son, the villain's son, is one of those wonderful off the wall sadists that you find in spaghetti westerns. Because obviously Italian spaghetti westerns, um, always have that kind of underlying vein of sadism. You kind of have that in some American westerns as well, but the Italian westerns, there's a whole slew of these wonderfully eccentric sadists. There's a wonderful whip duel in this one. The end scene where Hilton and Nero kind of assault this ranch to get the villains reminds me a lot of the end of John Woo's The Killer or Hard Boiled or Better Tomorrow 2. It's got a huge body count, and some of the deaths at the end are pure Fulci. Again, I'm not going to get into specifics, but some of the deaths are absolutely jaw-droppingly daft and wonderful. So if you were told, "Oh yeah, Fulci directed this," after watching it, you could probably go, "Yeah, I can believe that." It's just an absolute blast, and I would highly recommend Massacre Time. Again, Franco Nero, the interview is almost worth the price of admission, because he is one of those guys who's still with us and just gives so much great material, so many anecdotes about Fulci and everything else. It's just a wonderful release and one of my favourites in the box set. Then we have My Name is Picos, starring Robert Woods, who didn't really do much, an American actor. He plays a Mexican. There is something dodgy going on with his eyes, which I don't know whether they kind of did something with his eyes to make him look quote unquote more Mexican. This one's for me probably my least favourite out of the four, but it's still a lot of fun. This is about, strangely enough, a lone gunman, Picos, who gets involved or seems to get involved with this town, which is Houston. I think Houston's got a little bit bigger than what it's portrayed in this film. There's money that's been stolen, so this gang, led by a character called Klein, is pretty much into this town to try and find the money. Picos obviously has business with him from the past, because this is a spaghetti western after all. There's a character who plays a pastor slash undertaker, who's one of the kind of the best sleazy villains who just will give anybody information for money. It does have a feel of Yojimbo about it, but again, there's just wonderful moments. So even though it's not my favourite, it's got a really wonderful title song. The score's wonderful, and again, there's just, I find it hard sometimes to rate spaghetti westerns because I'll always give them the benefit of the doubt just because I enjoy them so much. Even if they're not the greatest, there'll be like a set piece that's amazing, or there'll be a nice subversion of the genre, or a nice surprise, or a crazy sadist will turn up, or the score is just amazing. So that's kind of, I do find it difficult to rate spaghetti westerns, to be honest. Next is Bandidos, starring Enrico Maria Salerno, who I didn't actually know was the Italian actor who dubbed Clint Eastwood in the Dollars films. He is wronged by somebody on a train robbery at the start of the film, and is injured. I'm not going to say how he's injured. And he becomes a guy who recruits people to be a gunslinger in a travelling show, to be an ace gunslinger, and he pretty much tries to recruit them to get his vengeance on his behalf. So he meets this character, and again, they're against this nasty piece of work. But the guy he recruits, he has business, obviously, with the villain as well. There's a lot going on. There's kind of surprises along the way. Again, this is another really good one. Again, all these films just have so much to enjoy in them. Obviously, if you don't like westerns, then obviously you're not going to buy this set. But if you like westerns, this is absolutely wonderful. And last but certainly not least is And God Said to Cain with Klaus Kinski. Klaus Kinski is the hero, which doesn't happen very often. Again, there's a lot of people who don't like westerns because they're kind of predictable and it's the same thing all the time, basic morality plays. But that's where the Italian westerns kind of elevated, because you didn't really know what to expect, and this one is a classic example of that. As far as being different, most of it happens at night, which again is pretty rare for a western, and pretty much the last hour of the film is just an elongated shootout at night in this town as Klaus Kinski is running about offing all the villains' henchmen. Again, this is about, we start with Klaus Kinski being in prison, and he gets out and obviously is looking for vengeance. Again, there's lots of family stuff and dark secrets. But again, it's a really odd film, not just for Klaus Kinski being the hero. Sorry, see, I'm so used to calling him the villain. It happens at night, like I said. It's got a really high body count as well. Probably not as high as Massacre Time, which is probably why it's called Massacre Time. Again, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. The ending mirrors Lady from Shanghai. See what I did there? It's just a lovely little film, and along with Massacre Time is probably my favourite out of the four. So that's just the kind of rough overview of Vengeance Trails and Years of Lead. I mean, I know lots of people in the community are perhaps a little bit critical of Arrow for, rehashing titles. Obviously the Argentos they're now releasing in 4K, and I get that, but to me, if it means the money they make from rehashing stuff, essentially, obviously they're doing that with Jolly. They're just putting, 3 Jolly titles in a box and putting a booklet in it and re-releasing them. But if it means we get sets like Vengeance Trails and Years of Lead and the Damaging set, which is absolutely gorgeous, I think, well, for me anyway, I think that's a fair trade-off. But this is a battle, so there has to be a winner. And for me, not surprisingly, it's the Vengeance Trail set. Not by a huge margin, I have to say. Years of Lead is wonderful, but the fact it's 5 films and 3 discs, plus the extras in the Vengeance Trails, I would say are superior to the extras in the Years of Lead. I would say they're both got excellent prints, but the Vengeance Trail transfers really pop, probably because they're westerns. Some of them have amazing compositions, whereas the Years of Lead films, they're all set in cities. It's more about the feel and the brutality, so you're not looking at amazing cinematography or anything. There's a grittiness to those films, whereas there's obviously more style to the westerns, so the transfers on the western set really pop, and they really look absolutely gorgeous. So for me, it's the Vengeance Trails, but I would recommend both sets. Years of Lead, as a, not just because they're all fun films, even though they are fairly hardcore, but just as a historical document of Italy and what was going on at the time. So I would definitely recommend both sets if you can pick them up, or pick them up in a sale. I don't know how quickly they'll sell out or anything like that. But for me, the winner of this battle is Vengeance Trails. Massacre Time and God Said to Cain, for me, are special, but the other two, there's a lot of value in them. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you go out and buy both. Don't blame me if you don't like them. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite films are of these sets, and whether you've seen them or liked them or didn't like them. And hopefully you'll join me again for more box set battles, which obviously don't happen very often because I actually have to get through a box set to do them. And on that box set bombshell, I will say cheerio. This is Saul Chironin from Saul Chironin Films,